All right. Yeah, this works. Okay. Hello, I'm Arvi. I'm going to talk to you about things you see on the screen. The screen will change, and I will talk about the changing things on the screen. So the first thing on the screen will be about what I'm going to talk about. And actually, this is a good moment to remember to put my mobile phone down, because I have a bad tendency of talking too much. So I'll try to time my talk a little bit so that I don't accidentally. The first time I talked about Baba Is You, I had, I think, 45 minutes or maybe even 1 hour and 30 minutes. And when I had five minutes left, I was at the like 0.2. So I'll try to avoid that this time. Anyway, so first of all, I'm going to introduce myself, give a short introduction of who I am. Why am I here? What have I done so that I'm here? Next up, I will talk about Baba Is You, the actual topic of the game, of this talk, not the game, but this talk. First of all, just what it is. How many of you have heard of Baba Is You? How many of you know what Baba Is You is about? Okay, well, there are still people who don't know about Baba Is You or what the game is about, so I will give some examples and explain why the name, what is this game. Next up, we'll be talking about the development process of the game. It might be interesting because there was actually a very surprising coincidence. I didn't know at all that the people talking previously had used ClickTeam Fusion, because Baba Is You was actually made not in ClickTeam Fusion, but its older version from 2006 called Multimedia Fusion. So I've used these kind of game creation tools for a long time, so the development process might be especially interesting, especially those of you who asked about using ClickTeam Fusion for prototyping, because, well, Baba Is You is a fully finished game made with that tool. Oh, there's actually a timer on this computer. That's super cool. I can time using that. Nice. And finally, I will explain my own hunches about, because Baba Is You has done pretty well. It won some awards at competitions, and obviously Chris very kindly asked me to talk to you about it, so there must be something, because otherwise Chris wouldn't have noticed me. So I will discuss some points about possibly why Baba Is You happened to be noticed by people. Anyway, let's move on, or get started, I guess. So, yeah, I'm a Finnish developer based in Helsinki. I've lived around Helsinki my whole life, although not in the exact city. I've been making games since primary school. I think it was maybe 5th grade when a schoolmate asked me, I just came to school. I had wanted to make games for a long time, ever since my cousin's Super Nintendo had Super Mario World and other really cool games. And my friend just asked me, hey, Arvi, would you like to make a game together with me? And they showed me Game Maker, which I mentioned previously. At that point in 2002, I think, Game Maker was still very early in its development. And we started making games. We made a Space Invaders Pac-Man combination, a lot of projects. I made a Pac-Man racing game using Game Maker at that point. But the problem was that, as mentioned earlier, Game Maker uses a scripting language, GML. And because I was a primary schooler, I didn't understand English very well. I didn't have the patience to learn coding, so Game Maker was too difficult for me. So later on, another schoolmate showed me this product called The Games Factory, which is the predecessor of ClickTeam Fusion, which didn't require any coding at all. And it was heaven sent for me. It was exactly right for me at that moment. It didn't require as much patience, because I could just move blocks. It was fully visual. I could get results very quickly. And I didn't need to learn coding. I didn't even need to learn English that much, because I could just trial and error my way through. So I stuck with that, and I stuck with that. Yeah, I started in 2004, and I'm still using tools of the same family, so that's scary in a way. And yeah, my game development first hobby, then career, has involved a lot of game jams and small experimental games. I enjoy that kind of stuff a lot. I will be talking later a little bit more about how that manifests in the games I make. I don't think it's very important for you or for this talk to go more deeply into why exactly I enjoy a particular kind of game. That's not very interesting. But I can recommend, by the way, if you are interested in making games and doing small prototypes, I can recommend going to some game jams. For example, Nordic Game Jam in Copenhagen every April is is an amazing game jam. And Baba Is You was actually, what is the kind of not too childbirth-related term to say, like, Baba was conceived at Nordic Game Jam in 2017, which leads us to, not actually to the development process, Baba Is You. I might have wanted to put these slides in a different order, but let's start with what is Baba Is You. We will get to the development process later. So, Baba Is You is a tile-based, turn-based puzzle game. It follows an archetype of puzzle games, generally considered to be started by the game Sokoban. Sokoban is a game where you have this kind of top-down view of kind of a storage building. You have walls, you have boxes, you have X's that mark the places the boxes should go into, and you have the janitor. And the job of the janitor is to fill all the market slots with boxes. You don't have to put every box in the correct spot, but you have to fill every marked spot with a box. So the game is fully just about pushing those boxes around into the correct places. The levels get increasingly complex. You have to pick the correct order in which to move boxes. It's very basic. It's very kind of fundamental game design. But it inspired a lot of people to kind of develop on this concept of pushing boxes around. For example, games such as Stephen's Sausage Roll, Snakebird, A Good Snowman is Hard to Build, Patrick's Puzzle Box, unless I misremember name, hopefully I didn't, Corrupt. There's a lot of games nowadays that utilize that same block-pushing basic system and build something interesting upon it. I'm a huge fan of this genre of puzzle games. With Baba Is You, the twist to this push boxes around thing is that some of those boxes are actually words. And certain words, when they come together, they can form sentences. Usually the sentences are 3 words long. They contain an is word, so you say something is something. For example, the name of the game is already one of these sentences. Baba Is You. You have a box that says Baba, you have a box that says is, you have a box that says you. And the interesting thing is that when you form these 3-word sentences, they affect the game world. They kind of dictate how the game works. So when you say Baba is you, the you means that something is you, the player playing the game. And when you say Baba is you, this creature, you can see in the next slide, this small creature there is called Baba. So if you say Baba is you, then Baba, the creature, is you, the player. You control Baba. And there are many different kinds of words. They can form many different kinds of combinations of sentences. And since you can push those boxes around, those words around, you can change the rules of the game. You can change these sentences. So for example, the most basic level would probably be Baba is you, flag is win. You have a flag, you have a Baba. If Baba touches the flag, you control Baba, you win the level. But you could also say that flag is you, in which case you would control the flag around. You could say Baba is win, and you would win if you touch the Baba. You could even say Baba is flag, to turn the Baba into a flag. So the game offers a lot of these kinds of having fun with words, which sounds kind of dry. I will return to this momentarily at the end, but an interesting point about the game is that none of these words things in the game world have meaning in themselves. If you have just a Baba somewhere and no word Baba or any sentences containing Baba, then Baba is nothing. They're just like, they could be like a decoration on the floor. And in many cases, for example, there's a word grass and like patches of grass. And usually there are no rules attached to grass, so it's just a decoration. But Baba could also be, or the flag could be a decoration. So the meaning of the game is built from those sentences. And the game features a very simplistic visual style, as you can see. This is both because I made it mostly alone. I wanted to pick a style that I can easily work on without having to stress myself about, does the game look good? I can just say it doesn't look good and get over it. Also because you cannot see in these still slides, the game uses this kind of wobbly animation style. Everything wobbles around all the time, which actually even though I just make a self-deprecating joke about the game looking bad, I kind of like the look, to be honest. It looks kind of scribbly, almost like a drawing, and I've used a similar style before, so that it was an obvious choice when I needed something that I can work on quickly. Anyway, I'll give a couple of examples of the rule system to get you more acquainted with the idea. Here we have a situation where there's flag is win. The flag is inside this walled-off area, so those gray boxes, hopefully you can see it with this lighting, they're kind of dark. They're walls, and you have the rule, wall is stop. It's kind of obvious what it does. Let's assume that there is a Baba is you rule somewhere out of the way. So you can move Baba around, but you cannot move through those walls because the wall is stop. The wall is a solid object. So what you can do is you can break the rule. You can break the rule, wall is stop, and suddenly, as mentioned, the wall is nothing. It doesn't do anything. It's just a decoration on the floor, and Baba can move safely to the flag. In another example, you have Baba somewhere in the level. Baba is not even shown here because I didn't have space in the slide. And you have the same, basically the same situation, just with the added Baba is you. Now, if you move around these different words, you can form a situation where instead of Baba being you, you can say wall is you. And what this means is that you are now actually controlling all those pieces of wall. All the walls in the level are now you, the player. So you can just, in this example, I moved a couple of steps to the right and engulfed the flag into the wall and won the level. So that kind of stuff works as well. An interesting thing to notice is that if you say Baba is you and then break that rule so that nothing is you, then that's kind of the failure state of the game. That's the situation where nothing happens anymore because nothing is you. No one is under your control, which has some possibly interesting philosophical points about consciousness. At least some people told me that. Anyway, now we get to the development process. It might have been really better to start with it, but that's how life goes. So, at Nordic Game Jam 2017, I wasn't really in a mood to make any new games. I had existing projects. I had finished my first commercial game, Environmental Station Alpha, in 2015. I was still getting enough money from that to sustain myself. I was working on the game Noita, mentioned briefly by Chris, which is my kind of what I do as my day job, not my kind of personal project, but a team job at a different company. So I had, for example, a sequel to my first commercial game, another project that I thought I would be working on. I came to Nordic Game Jam mostly to see friends. Then the theme of the Game Jam, for those who don't know Game Jams or are only vaguely familiar with the concept, they are usually events where you get together with people either online or in real life, and you make games maybe based on a theme, maybe under a time limit, usually under a time limit, sometimes under other restrictions. Basically challenge yourself to make a game with some limitations and then show it to other people at the event and maybe to even a wider audience. They are very handy for getting ideas. I personally enjoy them quite a lot, as mentioned. So Nordic Game Jam is usually pretty laid back. You make a game in 48 hours based on a theme. You don't really have to follow the theme that closely, but at the end of the event there's like a ranking or people vote for games. So in that sense, if you want to win the Game Jam in that sense, you might want to follow the theme. And the theme of the event in that case was not there, which is kind of vague, but that is often good for game jams because the idea is to give people ideas, not to kind of lock them down into a single game concept. At this point, I think I want to take a little bit of water. I wonder where I can place this microphone. Perfect. That might have been my first time drinking water when giving a presentation. So the theme was not there, and I don't think it was maybe in the minds of the organizers when they gave the theme, but it made me think of logical operators, especially how you can have some kind of a concept, like a concept wet. Something is wet, and you can reverse its meaning by saying not wet. Yeah, just as an example. And I had played a lot of puzzle games. I had been wanting to make a puzzle game for a long time, but had been running into some very serious design problems with my earlier projects that I won't go into deeper right now. But I was kind of in a mindset to think about puzzle games, and especially about these kind of block pushing puzzle games. So this logic operator concept combined in my head very chaotically and randomly after the theme was released, and I got this mental image of there being a pool of lava in a block pushing game, and some blocks of ice. And if these ice blocks come close to the lava, they melt, because lava is hot and ice is meltable. But then the player would be able to say, ice is not melt. They would be able to use this not operator to negate the meltability of the ice. It sounded like a kind of an awful idea. I felt that it could be cool for like one level. There might be like one cool idea in there, because many of my earlier puzzle game ideas had been in that same situation where it's like there's one really cool idea, but then nothing else, or maybe 3 cool ideas, but then nothing else. But because at game jams, the really nice thing, if you are in a good game jam or a nice game jam or a cozy game jam, the nice thing is that you don't really have to stress about it that much unless you really want to win. You can just take an idea, make a prototype out of it, especially because I use this multimedia fusion, which is very good for prototyping. Many game creation tools are. And then at the end of the game jam, if it doesn't work out, if you run into a problem, if you get stuck during the game jam, you can just throw it away and go have a soft drink that I won't name, not to give advertisement for like drink companies, and maybe talk with some cool people, have a sauna if the venue offers that, or go swimming or go for a walk, or whatever. You can just chill if it doesn't work out. As you can see, the slide kind of betrays me. I ended up winning the game jam. So the game ended up really working out, to my surprise. I was completely certain that I would run either to like a design problem or a coding problem, because this kind of like a rule forming system is actually not maybe the easiest to implement, and also block pushing systems, because I wanted to have one very specific feature in my block pushing system. It was not trivial to implement. So, but I'm happy that I didn't run into any huge dead ends there. Nice. But yeah, so because I had entered this situation with such a strong mindset of this is probably not going to be anything, I'll just work on my existing projects and talk with friends, and this will just be like a quick test if it works. After the game jam, even though I won technically, I was unsure what to do with the game. I kind of, sometimes when you make a game for a game jam, even if it's fun, even if it works, it might be that you cannot really scale it into a full commercial title. You might not even want to. If it's a very experimental, abstract game, it might be actually cooler to keep it as a small jam thing. Some games, very like party game-like games, might even work best at the game jam. So it might be best not to kind of push it and try to make a, I don't know, make a World of Warcraft out of it. But so with Baba Is You, I had kind of a similar feeling that, okay, maybe I should just keep it as a game jam project. It was cool, but it probably wouldn't make sense as a full game. Then people told me that, hey, the game is cool. I hope you are making a full game out of it. And I guess. Then I started thinking of, okay, yeah, maybe I could do that. But I had one big design problem to solve at first, because this kind of changing the rules gameplay lends itself very well for kind of sandboxy games where you just play around. You can build your own machines or contraptions, some kind of Rube Goldberg machines where things just happen in a sequence. Or it could lend itself for a kind of a hardcore puzzle game. I enjoy pretty hardcore puzzle games. For example, Stephen's Sausage Roll I mentioned earlier and Snakebird are both very difficult puzzle games. I like those. And I was kind of on the edge of, it would be nice. This idea of Baba Is You sounds like it would be cool to introduce for as many people as possible. So in that sense, it would be cool to have people see it as a kind of a sandboxy thing that is very easily approachable. But at the same time, I kind of want to make a hardcore puzzle game. What do I do? And also, there was a third problem that I didn't really give that much thought, but some people mentioned to me, which is that, as mentioned earlier, the game kind of includes some themes about consciousness, about this kind of thing where the you, like Baba is not a conscious being. Nothing in the game is a conscious being, but this you word is the conscious being, and you can move the consciousness around. It's a very intriguing idea. Some people asked me if I wanted to make like a story-based game. A person actually contacted me and told me that they might have some kind of like a story idea, that they would want to collaborate with me and work as a storyteller when I make a puzzle game. I wasn't very confident about that. I felt that if I wanted to make a story-based game, I would want to be very certain about the story, so I ended up skipping that part of I just said that, okay, I'll make a not very story-based game. And it worked out pretty well. And in the end, I decided to go with trust my heart and make a hardcore puzzle game. But with some stuff to make it as approachable as possible. Like not make a hardcore puzzle game in the sense that it's frustrating or bad to play to people who don't enjoy hardcore puzzle games, but to make a game that doesn't restrict itself so that it doesn't become too hard, but more like tries to make itself as approachable as possible while still being a puzzle game. I think the hardcore word is actually pretty bad there. It's used in some pretty bad contexts nowadays. So imagine you didn't see that word there and I didn't use it at all during the presentation. So I basically went through the first point. So I got a lot of feedback from developer friends, both at the Game Jam and afterwards when I sent the first build of the game to some online friends. They gave me a lot of feedback over the 2 years I worked on Baba Is You. The game development went very smoothly because I had people who told me constantly about, like, what if you try this? What if you do this differently? This doesn't work. I didn't like this, stuff like that. I super recommend having people who don't mind too much if you send them builds and kindly ask them to test it, but only kindly. This is kind of a minor point, but I had already mentioned the graphical parts of the game, about how I approached the graphical bits of the game. When it comes to the audio, I generally consider myself incapable of composing, but in this case, I felt that I had kind of slowly built up my skills, so I wanted to take a try jab at doing all the audio myself, and it ended up working pretty well. So if you are in a situation where you have a nice game idea, and you are like, how do I do the graphics, or how do I do the music? It might be a cool idea to at least try and see if you can do it yourself, because sometimes if you know your limitations, you can pick a style that works around those limitations. You can, like, I don't know, do something really abstract, or I don't know, there's a lot of ways. I recently saw an old newspaper comic strip from the beginning of the 20th century, which used wood carvings that were photographed as the panels of the comic. So that's a very impressive way of overcoming someone's limitations, like kind of traditional drawing, maybe. And yeah, the game ended up having a lot of levels. It's always nice. I enjoy making levels. Making levels for the game was the most fun part, so I'm happy about this end result, even though it technically broke my expectations and made the game take 1 year longer to make. And, oh yeah. So just to quickly mention, well, okay, this is kind of pointless to just quickly put in here, but I'll mention it anyway because I had a nice slide point. So for me personally, as I will mention soon, when making games and when making puzzle games, I want to surprise players and I want to get these kind of aha moments or like amusing moments of realization for the players. And with Baba Is You, I felt that the game had very ample opportunities for that, for reasons I will discuss next. And so when designing puzzles for the game, I tried to maximize the necessity for the player to realize something or to have these kind of aha moments. And for me, the technique of reaching that was to try make every single level do something completely new, not just like a new configurations of familiar things, but have the solution require something that is not required anywhere else. It didn't obviously work. You can make over 200 levels with every player getting a unique experience in every level. That would be really cool, but at least I can't do it. If you can do it, then that's super cool. So some of the levels obviously ended up being more similar to each other than some others, but it was a nice starting point for the design. And the way the kind of making these unique level designs worked for me was that I picked interactions between these words of the game, because the words were really the big thing of the game. Nothing else in the game is really unique or interesting in the same way that this sentence forming, rule forming system was. So I thought of these words I had, thought of this rule system I had, and tried to figure out how can I combine these different components and words of the system in a way that creates something that feels cool to me myself, or hasn't been done in other levels, or is in some other way interesting, in my opinion. Which is like, you should ask other people's opinions if you do something like that, because then you get more ideas that you wouldn't like yourself even think about. And when I found some that kind of an interaction, I reverse engineered kind of. I thought, what kind of a level do I have to make that requires the player to utilize this interaction I thought of? So, yeah, I guess to give an example, I could have this idea of, what if you have to make the walls you, because that sounds cool, like you control the entire wall, how cool is that? And then I would think of, I need to make sure that the player cannot just break the wall is stop rule, that they cannot just walk through the walls. I have to make sure that they can only, or almost only, solve the level by saying wall is you. So that was kind of the reverse engineering process of seeing what the end point is and working backwards to what the beginning design of a level was. It was kind of error prone, but it worked out pretty well. Finally, I'll discuss some of the reasons, because people have been telling me, both by just telling me and both by buying the game, that the game is interesting in some level, and it's odd. So I've been trying to, especially because some people actually ask me, like, why is the game? Why do people like the game? And how do I know that? So I've been trying to kind of consider, based on what people have told me and what I've kind of figured out myself, what might be the reason why the game is interesting. Is it the very nice, solid black background? Is it the, like a 2-year quick development cycle? People are excited about the speed of my development. So I feel that I could maybe, there are probably more things that I haven't even considered. Other people are way better at this kind of analysis than I am, but some other things are at least that big part of the game is that many of the words or the objects you see in the game, maybe not Baba, but you have flag, a wall, there's also rocks, birds, water, grass, many of these kind of familiar things you see in many games. And many of the words or the kind of rules that you can make with these objects are also kind of familiar. Wall is stop is a very familiar rule. In most games, you cannot walk through walls. Flag is win is kind of obvious. In many games, you have some kind of a goal post, goal flag that you have to touch to win the level. In many games, you control something. In many games, something is you. It's a very kind of familiar concept. Many games, you have pushable blocks. Rock is push is a, when you understand what rock is push means, the pushability of things kind of makes sense. But in the game Baba is you can change that. You can say that flag is push, Baba is stop, rock is you. That kind of stuff. You can change the things from familiar to unfamiliar. And for example, there is one level very early in the game where you are in this yard of grass surrounded by walls. And in every level apart from one before that, wall has been stop without exception. Except in this level there is no rule, wall is stop. And instead actually the grass is stop, but that's not really relevant to the point. The point is that for some players it actually takes a very long time to notice that the wall is not stop, that they can just walk through the walls. The game doesn't require them to realize, it requires them to realize that they have to do that to solve the level, but it doesn't kind of, the design of the level is interesting because it's not something that is in the level, it's something that is missing from the level. And in that sense, many players might assume that, okay, walls in games are usually solid, I cannot walk through walls, and then it's like, oh, in this game that actually is not the case. And I think that is, for many players, and for myself at least, it's interesting. Another thing might be that the game, because I spent 2 years on the game and the second year was kind of extra. I had planned to finish the game in 1 year, but you know, like many of you probably know how game development usually goes. You don't finish a game in 1 year usually, unless it's, I think the original Binding of Isaac was finished in eight months. So, okay, sometimes it happens, but usually it doesn't. So it took an extra year to make the game, which was actually really good because it gave me time to really kind of explore the concept as deeply as possible, to figure out these final, more maybe meta-level interactions. For example, spoiler alert, later on in the game, you meet the word level, and then you can say, level is you. And what that means is that you actually start controlling the whole level. And that is, again, a very kind of cool or amusing thing that I really want to have in my games. And if I hadn't spent 2 years making the game, I wouldn't have realized that thing and actually implemented it. So that was kind of, I was happy with the end result in terms of how thoroughly it went through this concept of rule changing and what kind of rules can be applied to what kind of things. And the third thing is kind of obvious, the sandboxiness that was mentioned. Especially early levels of the game allow the player to approach the solutions in many different ways. I kind of wanted to have that because even though later on the levels are more specific, because the game is still a puzzle game, a fairly difficult puzzle game, so in later levels I have to be more restrictive about the approaches the player can take, because otherwise the levels would be kind of more samey to each other. But early on, the game offers a lot of this kind of experimentation for the player. So maybe that was, I think based on feedback, that has been a thing that people have liked. And yeah, the final points I kind of made already. The game, yeah, the unintended solutions are sometimes an issue. Sometimes there are things you don't want because it makes, often these unintended solutions, for example, that breaking the wall is stop rule and going through walls straight to the finish line. If you can do that in 10 levels, then it's not interesting anymore. It's interesting the first time. So I wanted to kind of allow some unintended solutions, but yeah, progressively restrict them. The game will get a level editor next year, so that will hopefully increase this kind of toying around with the concept, which will hopefully be for those people who are not super into these very difficult puzzle games, but are more interested in this kind of rule forming system. I hope the level editor will be an interesting thing to just kind of play around and make those Rube Goldberg machines. And because modders found the kind of debug level editor already within the game during the release. If you go check the game on Steam, you can actually find how to unlock that editor. It was a couple of weeks after the game's release that someone made Conway's Game of Life in Baba Is You, and we're very happy about that. That was super cool. And finally, I already mentioned this, I'll mention it again. For me personally, a big part of the game design is to elicit this kind of surprised laugh from a player. It's super cool when at events, I can make a game where when people play it, they see something and they're like, oh, haha, that's cool. I didn't expect that. It makes sense, but I didn't expect it. Puzzle games are very good for this, at least in my opinion. And I want to keep doing that in my future games, even if they are not puzzle games. So I can't really, none of these are really kind of tips on how you should approach game design. These are mostly just, I'm a Finnish person who made games, who enjoys talking way too much and trying to make dry jokes in the hopes of people laughing at them. This is what amuses me when making games. If you feel the same way, then that's cool. Give me your secrets. If not, then make the games you want to make. Thank you.
Okay, so are there questions?
First of all, thanks for the talk. It was really amazing. One thing to add to your reasons why the game is so popular is it's a secondary thing, not in the game itself, but the concept is so simple and compressible. The first time I encountered your game was one GIF, which was only 3 images, I think, looped, and I saw these 3 images and I was like, oh my god, if he does everything that is possible with this idea, which you clearly did, it's just it grabs somebody really fast, I think. So it's really helpful to reach a lot of persons.
Yep, thank you very much. Yeah, I guess it does help that this kind of The block pushing system, as mentioned, is a very fundamental game design system. It's used in many games, so many people are familiar with this. You don't really have to explain what pushing blocks around means. And the rule word system is also kind of simple because it plays around with concepts that anyone who knows English understands, the kind of English grammar, broken English grammar at that. So I guess the idea is, in some level, it feels kind of simple at its basis, which might make it more easily approachable. That might very well be. At least it made it sometimes easily gifable, which is obviously a powerful marketing tool these days.
Hi, over here. Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks very much for the talk, and thanks for making the game. I enjoyed it a lot until level 16, where I'm still stuck. So my question is about, I was wondering, I found a weird copy of your game on Android. I don't want to name it, do not market it too much, but I was wondering whether you're thinking of releasing the game on Android and iOS at some point. Have I missed an announcement, maybe?
So yeah, Baba Is You was cloned for the first time on mobile a year before it was released. When the game won the Independent Games Festival Excellence in Design Award, there was one game called Baba Is You on App Store and Google Play Store. That got taken down. Afterwards, there have been more. Some of them are such that they cannot be taken down. They are kind of too different already from Baba Is You, which is kind of nice. Like if they had started with making similar games, but not the exact same game, I would have been more okay with it. But because they kind of cloned the game, it left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. Yeah, it would be super cool to release the game on mobile. Unfortunately, I can't really say much about that. I'm a very neurotic person by nature, and I always feel super neurotic when talking about kind of business stuff.
Oh, yeah, sorry, don't worry about it.
It's completely fine, totally. Like you had all the right to ask that, but
because it seems the concept would translate well, so that's.
I definitely agree, and let's say that it would be super nice. We'll see what happens. Right now, the level editor is on my mind as this kind of, I really want to get that done. It would be super cool, and also just to get it out of the way as well. So we'll see what happens.
Great, thank you very much.
I just want to say thank you, and I'm also a big fan of the game. I have two questions. The first is, how big is the team? Like, how big did it start, right, with the Game Jam, and then how big it became? Roughly. It doesn't need to be the exact number.
So this question is slightly difficult to answer for a couple of reasons, but the basis is that I collaborated with another company called MP2 Games to make the games Nintendo Switch port and Mac port and Linux port and even actually the Windows version. As mentioned in the beginning, Baba Is You was made with Multimedia Fusion. It's the same program that the people talking previously, Simona and Josef, had used or were using for prototyping. And Multimedia Fusion is very good for prototyping. It's a surprisingly powerful tool, even though it's 13 years old at this point. And there have been newer versions that have their own limitations and stuff. It's kind of like it's nice for game jams. It's kind of difficult for making fully finished games because it lacks portability and it has some kind of problems coming from its age as a tool. Like many other tools have become more sophisticated. So if you understand Multimedia Fusion and ClickTeam Fusion very well, you can do really cool stuff with them, and some people have definitely done there. For example, Five Nights at Freddy's was made with this tool. But if you don't know, there's a lot of like pitfalls you can fall into. So because I wanted to have the game on as many platforms as possible, Nintendo Switch sounded like a really cool concept. I collaborated with this company in Denmark who specializes in porting these kind of difficult to port games, who actually has an engine to port Multimedia Fusion games specifically, which was really nice. So in that sense, they are kind of part of the team, even though it's a separate company, and we kind of more collaborated than worked as a team, so to say, in a way, but we also worked as a team, kind of. And then there's obviously numerous people who gave me advice and helped me and gave me consultation and play tested the game. made translations for the game. We actually released the beta version of the translations of the game last night when I was in my hotel here in München. So those people were kind of part of the team as well because they collaborated, but at the same time they were more like giving ideas and stuff. So traditionally, I guess you don't say that those are team members. So in this sense, the question is hard to answer. And if we want the selfish answer, I did everything but the game engine myself. I did the audio, I did the sprites, I did the coding, I did most of the level design. There's a couple of levels which were made by other people, but like in that very selfish and narrow-viewed point of view, it was kind of made by me. But
Okay,
please keep in mind
thank
those
you.
people I mentioned, those other people.
The second question, which I'm not sure if I should ask after the mobile question, was because I'm a big fan, I wanted to know if there's any possibility of a multiplayer, or if it has ever crossed your mind of a like two-player game or some multiplayer.
Actually, when I was in a airport leaving the Game Developers Conference in 2018, I arrived at the airport, I think 4 hours early, and I just sat down and worked on Baba Is You because at that point that was kind of what I did on my free time. And I implemented a two-player mode because it felt like a fairly simple thing to implement. It actually isn't. It's not been tested. It hasn't been tested. Like the code is still in the game. You can, if you, for example, unlock the debug editor, you can make your own two-player levels. But the problem with a turn-based game is that, well, there are many different ways to solve this problem, but basically you have to solve somehow how the turn ordering is done if you have several players. And with a puzzle game like Baba Is You, where you kind of want to move around quite a lot, some of the levels have a lot of empty space you have to move through. It wouldn't really do if it was fully turn-based, so you move once, second player moves once, you move once. That would take way too much time. So right now the game actually has this kind of a like first come, first serve thing where if the players keep pressing their directional buttons, the game just moves on at like double speed because they can both enter buttons at the same time. It probably doesn't really work, but if you have two people who are really coordinated and are kind towards each other and don't really kind of talk over each other, I think you could make pretty nice two-player levels. And I want to experiment with that when I release the level editor. It would be really nice to have like a example two-player level for the level editor.
Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned that after the Nordic Game Jam you won. It was probably a great feeling. And what was the process of deciding on doing the game, committing to it?
You mean after the Game Jam?
Yeah, with the prototype and just making the decision to make it a game.
It happened pretty quickly after the Game Jam. I think it was... like I remember that right after kind of getting the prize, I talked with people and I said openly to them that I think the game will be, I will just keep it as a game jam, or I will make a small expansion that will still be freeware or something like that. And then when I got into discussions that evening with people, we went to get some food together, I think, and we discussed the game with a bunch of people. The discussions, I guess, kind of convinced me. Like the more I talked with people, the more I got the idea that, hey, actually it might be cool to try to make something about this. As mentioned, the biggest problem for me at that point was this kind of division in my head between this sandboxiness and this more difficult actual puzzle solving stuff, because I felt that I couldn't combine those. I couldn't make a game that is both a simple sandbox where you can just play around with things freely and also make a game that is a puzzle game with increasing difficulty. So I felt that I had to solve that, but it's hard to remember anymore. But I could say that during that first evening after winning the Nordic Game Jam, I was already on some level deciding that, okay, I'll do something. This seems like too good an opportunity to pass on. And after that event, there's this site called Warp Door, which highlights small games all around. They have a Twitter account that retweets or tweets about a lot of really cool small games that people might not otherwise notice, and they have a website that does the same, that is run by a very nice person who used to do the same at the Indie Games blog. they made a tweet about Baba Is You, and the tweet got a lot of attention because I had the Game Jam version. It still is available on itch.io. So people found the game on itch.io, and some people streamed it and really enjoyed it. So that was also a huge boost to my kind of confidence about the decision of making a full game out of it.
Thank you very much for the talk, sir. I wanted to ask you, as a game developer, what level of control would you say you had in sort of bringing the game to the player? Because I noticed that the elements of the game are very changeable, very mutable, and so did you encounter any instances where the logic of the statements made inside the game actually broke the experience for the player in a bad way?
There are definitely, I think the biggest issues, like almost every single level in the game was changed at least once because there were unintended solution or something else that just didn't work out. And as always happens with this kind of stuff, as the developer, I deeply underestimated the difficulty of the game. I assumed that, okay, the game is the basic idea. Once you grasp that, you can get going. But of course, if you are not the developer, it's hard to grasp the idea at first. You need to learn the rules of the game. So I think the biggest issues with presenting the game to other people were situations where I had a bad assumption about how the player understands the game system. For example, when I was showcasing the game at Gamescom in 2018, a lot of people who had not played that many games in general came to play the game, and it was really interesting to follow because there were some situations where possibly, for example, there were some assumptions I had made about what feels intuitive to the player because it felt intuitive to me. And it wasn't intuitive, maybe to some players, maybe to most players. And that I got, because I mentioned earlier that I got a lot of feedback throughout the development. So that feedback was really needed because otherwise the game would have been way too opaque, way too hard to approach because it was like my personal view of what is easy and what is intuitive, where in truth it would have been just like this Finnish mystery for people to solve. And actually there were some levels where I had some kind of intuition about, I won't explain the details, come to talk to me if you want to hear the details, but at some point in the development it felt intuitive to me that with conveyor belts you can move inside walls. Don't ask why, or ask me later why. But I made a level where you have to move inside walls with conveyor belts, and then some people testing the game told me that, hey, that is not intuitive. Even if it feels to you, that is not intuitive. And I'm like, okay, I'll remove moving inside walls with conveyor belts. It's not in the game anymore. But there are probably some other similar situations still in the game because the testers felt they were equally intuitive, but some other people might not feel that they were intuitive. Hopefully this answered to the question to some extent.
Of course, thank you.
As a developer, I have a short question about the publishing. What was your journey as I would say, single producer between the finished game to the release on Steam?
I had already released one game on Steam in 2015, so I had a pretty good grasp of the kind of like how much work it takes to kind of get the game on Steam. My previous game had been on Steam Greenlight. This was already on Steam Direct, so I had to run through way fewer hoops to get the game on Steam. I was in a very lucky spot because the game won awards at the Independent Games Festival, so even a year before the game's release, I was in a position where other people were interested in getting the game to different platforms. So I was in the privileged position of being able to choose what to do instead of having to kind of look out for people to publish the game. And I did have discussions with some publishers because I felt that it would make it easier for me in terms of paperwork and getting the game on Nintendo Switch. I had heard some stories about, for example, Nintendo Switch requiring some bureaucracy that would be easier to avoid if I did things through a publisher. But eventually, when discussing things, some other people who had done a similar thing told me that actually it's not like you can do it yourself. If you're ready to be very stressed out and lead an unhealthy life, then you can do all these things by yourself. And I was like, oh yeah, I love that. And ended up doing everything myself. Told politely to the publisher that let's not. Partially because of my neuroticism, I enjoy doing things on my own if I can, because I'm afraid of running into some kind of a bad position because I don't read some agreement carefully enough and stuff. But yeah, I'd say that my example of how the game got published is not a good example in general for game developers, because the game was started by luck in this kind of a fortunate situation.
Is this on? Yeah. No. To add, would you have, under these circumstances, no particular advice for us besides winning awards?
I would say that the previous presentation had some really good advice. For example, the making connections part. I feel that having been at Game Jams quite a lot did help me, because it first of all, it gave me feedback from people who I trust to know very much about game design. I could be more trustworthy about my own judgment when I got backing from other people who I knew that, okay, those people have made cool stuff. Also, it gave me situations where I could, like, for example, the first presentation about Baba Is You I gave was at Nordic Game Jam, and even though I'd kind of botched that presentation itself, having been at Nordic Game Jam and having made games there probably help a bunch. The scene has been growing exponentially over the past years, but I still think there are many areas where the circles are small enough that I feel kind of iffy saying this, because it also kind of sounds like making friends for business reasons. I don't really want you to do that. Please don't just like pretend that you like people even though you just want money out of them or something. Just kind of like on top of making good friends, you can make good business partners by going to game events and talking with people and being a decent person, as was mentioned. Also, when it comes to publishing, it might be fun to try to do some things yourself that you don't feel that you could do yourself. For example, I wanted to make, as mentioned, I made the music myself, even though I hadn't made a commercial game with music myself before. And I also wanted to make the trailers of the game myself. And the first trailer of Baba Is You was made by recording GIF animations, putting those GIF animations into Multimedia Fusion, playing them like GIF animations in a row, and then recording them while playing music at the same time. There are many indie games offers a lot of situations where if you have an idea and you feel that you can pull it off, and you have some kind of, especially if you have something that isn't very commonly done, it can be a strength. But obviously, when I say this, it's like I don't want to be innovative. If you trust yourself, then you will surely succeed, because that doesn't happen. But if you trust yourself and if you have innovative ideas, then you might at least have fun failing.
Well, thanks and good luck.
So if that's all of the questions, then please give it up for Arvi.